Today we're making chocolate babka as seen on the Great British Bake Off Technical Challenge. Hi everyone, welcome to Black Cat Kitchen. Hope you're doing well. Today we're making a chocolate babka, which is a beautiful loaf made with an enriched dough, slathered in chocolate and rolled up and braided and baked to golden perfection. This is a similar recipe that you may have seen on the Great British Bake Off Technical Challenge. Let's get started. Here are all the things you'll need to make the babka. The ingredients and measurements will be linked below. To our bowl, we're going to add eggs, room temperature, milk, slightly warm, more like body temperature. So if you've just taken it out of the fridge, pop it in the microwave for about 30 seconds or even on the stove top in a pan just to warm it up a little bit. Our sugar, our very soft butter, and our yeast. We're going to mix this on the stand mixer, but if you don't have a stand mixer, you can use a fork or a whisk. I'm going to do it on the stand mixer because it's a lot easier. With our dough hook attachment, we're going to mix this up until it combines together. It won't be perfect because the butter won't mix in all of the way at this stage, but that's what makes it the enriched dough. To this, we're going to add our flour and our salt. You can see those butter clumps are still in there. Don't worry, they'll all incorporate together once you've got everything else in. So always add your salt after you've added your flour. This protects the yeast. Salt tends to kill yeast. So if you put the salt in straight away or in with that wet mix, the yeast won't bubble up and you won't have a nice airy dough. So let's get that all combined until it forms a very wet, shaggy dough. You can see that dough has come together. It hasn't really developed any gluten yet, but it's absorbed all of that butter. So just make sure you get all of those sides scraped down because it is still very wet and all combined into one mass. We're going to cover it up for 20 to 30 minutes. While that's resting up, let's get started on the chocolate sauce. So we're going to chop some chocolate, some that we'll set aside to sprinkle on top of the chocolate sauce and some to go in the chocolate sauce itself. If you don't like chocolate, you don't have to use it in this recipe. You can make a sugary cinnamon spread like you would for a cinnamon bun. You can use chocolate hazelnut spread. Biscoff would be really lovely. I wouldn't suggest using a chocolate sauce from the supermarket unless you can find a really, really thick one. So we're going to put all of that chopped chocolate, about 150 grams of it, into our sauce pot. You can do this in the microwave if you'd like, and just give it 15 to 20 second blasts with the butter mixed in to really get it nice and melted together. And in goes our butter, and we'll turn it to quite low. While that's melting, we'll get our powdered sugar and our cocoa powder mixed together. Give it a little whiskey whisk with your fork because my mini whisk is missing. Now that the last of our butter has melted and it's this lovely, glossy, chocolatey gorgeousness, we're going to mix it into that powdered sugar and cocoa powder. So let's get that all dumped in there. Don't let any go to waste. Make sure you're scraping that pot clean. You've got the option at this point to customize it. If you like salted chocolate, you can add salt to this. If you like Mexican chocolate, you can add cinnamon, chilies if you really want them, cayenne. And just give that a good stir until all of those lumps start to smooth out. And because I'm me, I'm gonna add a good splash of vanilla. Completely optional, but recommended. Now that that's nice and smooth, we'll set it aside to cool until we're ready to fill the dough. Now that our dough has good and absorbed all of that liquid, we're gonna start kneading it. I'm going to knead this on my stand mixer for about 5 to 8 minutes, but you can definitely knead it by hand. Just flour your surface lightly and fold away from you and pull towards you. Another option, if you don't want to do that, is the slap and fold, where you can lift up your dough, slap it down and fold it over as you do that. Come from the other side and turn it again. So let's get that started and we'll see you in a few minutes. I'm just going to butter down our bowl that we're going to transfer the dough into so that it has the ability to rise up, but it doesn't stick and lose all of that beautiful airiness once we've pulled it out afterwards. So just make sure you get butter nice and up the sides there. When your dough is finished, it should have this really glossy look to it. So what you'll want to do is just perform what's called the window pane test, and that's how you know you have enough gluten. So what you'll do is just take a little bit of your dough, pull it up, and give it a gentle stretch until you can just about see through it without it tearing. So we're just going to pop our dough into this bowl. We'll let that rest for about an hour and a half to 2 hours until it's really bubbled up, almost double in size. So just cover that up and let it do its thing. This recipe actually makes 2 loaves of bread because if you're going to the trouble, you may as well make 2. They make great gifts. One of ours is to be eaten and the other one is going to a friend who's just had a baby. Likewise, if you're not interested in sharing, and once you've tried it, trust me, you won't be, they do freeze really nicely for about a month. So you'll know your dough is ready if you just press into it and the little indentation stays in the dough there. We're going to lightly flour our working area. We don't want too much flour on that dough. And then we're going to turn our dough out. I love working with enriched dough. It's just so beautiful and soft to work with. So we're actually going to split this in half because, like I said, it makes 2 babkas. Just pop the other half aside back in your bowl, cover it back up again, just so you don't form a skin on it. You'll want the shorter side towards you, and we're looking to make this about 9 by 16 inches. That gives us a really good size for the pans. So I'm just going to spread it lightly, really gently, and I'm going to flour that down a little bit because that is quite wet. All right, let's just start to roll it out. So you just want to go very gently, just get that bit of gas out of the dough because it will have a second rising opportunity shortly. So it's okay to knock out those air bubbles. And you want this as thin as you possibly can. Try and keep it as rectangular as possible so that your braids are even. You'll want to give your chocolate a really good stir at this point. If it's any thicker than this consistency here, you'll want to stick it in the microwave just for about 5 to 10 seconds until that butter starts to loosen up. You don't want the sauce to be warm. Room temperature or cold is best, but make sure you've got that spreadable consistency so it doesn't ruin your dough. So we're going to use about half of our chocolate spread. Don't forget we've got 2 loaves to make. And just drop it onto your dough and spread it out. You're going to leave about a ½ inch just at the end there to seal it. So we're going to take some of that chocolate that we set aside earlier and just sprinkle it over the chocolate sauce, because who doesn't like more chocolate? You're going to use just less than half because you want a little bit on the top of each loaf, and you definitely need some for your second loaf as well. Just gives it a bit of a different texture when you're eating. Let's get it rolled up. So we're going to roll from the short end. Just start really slowly, gently, rolling the ends up. You can put some parchment under this if you find that's an easier way to roll it. And you can just lift the parchment as you go. Roll it along, make sure it's nice and tight. Try and keep those edges in if you can. It's a bit tricky. And then that end just gets tucked up and seals it all into place. So I'm going to set this one aside, roll up the other log, and we're going to pop them in the freezer for 15 minutes just to get that filling really nice and set up before we braid it. When you put it in the freezer, make sure you're doing it seam side down so that nothing opens up. Slap that dough. I pulled my dough out of the freezer, and while it was freezing, I liberally buttered my loaf pans. So we'll move one of our logs over to our larger cutting board, and that's quite firm now from being in the freezer for that 15 minutes. So we're just going to slice it straight down the middle really carefully. Remember, you've got those chocolate bits in there, and you really want to try and keep those layers separated. And hopefully, if all is well, it will nicely separate into those beautiful babka layers. Looks so good. So I tend to start in the middle and just cross it over and just work the dough around itself. You're creating basically a two-stranded braid, and you want as many twists as possible because that's what gives the babka that flaky, ooey gooiness. All right, so that's what we want it to look like when it's ready to go in the tin. And then I'm gonna pick up my tin. I'm just gonna kind of smush it together so it's going to fit nicely, nice and tight into the tin on both ends. We're just going to leave that for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and then we'll sprinkle the rest of the chocolate on top and pop it in the oven. So set that aside, cover it up, and get started on your other one. So put them under their little blanket for their little nap. After about an hour and a half to 2 hours, the dough will have perked up just a little bit. Because it's got such a lot of filling in there, you won't get quite the same rise as you would on a typical brioche dough, but you can see we've got quite a bit of rise. We're just going to sprinkle a little bit of that reserved chocolate over the top. And into the oven they go, into a preheated oven at 375 Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius for about 35 to 40 minutes. While those are baking, let's make our simple syrup for the top. So we use equal parts of water and sugar. I'm using about 100 grams of each. On medium heat, just let that dissolve until all of the sugar is melted. We aren't getting the sugar very hot here, but I tend not to use a spoon and just swirl it around in the pan until the sugar melts so that we don't cause crystallization. Once the sugar is fully dissolved, we're going to take it off the heat and let it cool a little bit. We'll need it for as soon as the babka comes out of the oven. Look at that, all of those layers, they look incredible. I'm just going to rest them on a wire rack. The rack will allow them to cool a little bit more evenly from the underneath, and we're going to get that syrup on top. Now I'm just going to pour the syrup just gently on top, just not too much in any specific spot. You'll get that sizzle from that hot pan. But you are going to use all of the syrup, and I tend not to use a pastry brush here because it will spread that chocolate out, and you really want those distinct layers. You are going to use all of this syrup. I know it seems like a lot, but it really does help to preserve the babka and keep it nice and moist. I know it's hard to resist pulling them out and cutting them up right now, but that chocolate inside is just like molten lava, and that syrup really needs to absorb. So let them sit probably for a couple of hours until they've cooled right down and the tins are quite cool to touch. Then you can turn them out and we'll slice them up. Let's have a taste. That syrup really makes it so moist on the inside. And the enriched dough is just so creamy and delicious, and that chocolate sauce. It's not too sweet, but it's not too bitter. It's like that really lovely in between. It all just goes together so nicely. You've got to make this. Thanks for watching Black Cat Kitchen. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and ring that bell so that you get notifications every time I post a new video. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.